Your muscles are not shrinking because time is cruel, but because the body is quietly adapting to what it no longer hears. Long before weakness appears, the signals that once told muscle tissue to grow, repair, and stay strong begin to fade. The brain speaks less clearly, movement becomes less demanding, and the muscle cells respond with efficiency rather than strength. This is not failure or decay. It is the body conserving energy in a world that asks less of it. What we call aging is often the echo of years of silence between intention, movement, and biology. Muscle loss is often described as something that happens to us, as if age arrives like a thief in the night and quietly removes strength from the body. But biology tells a different story, one that is less dramatic and far more revealing. Muscle loss is not a sudden collapse or a sign that the body is failing. It is an adaptive response, a slow and deliberate adjustment to changing signals over time. The human body is built for efficiency, not aesthetics, and every tissue constantly measures whether it is worth maintaining at its current size and cost. Muscle is metabolically expensive. It demands energy, nutrients, oxygen, and neural attention. When the body senses that these resources are no longer justified by demand, it begins to scale muscle down, not out of damage, but out of intelligence. From early adulthood onward, the body continuously evaluates its environment. Are muscles being asked to lift, carry, stabilize, or resist? Are they receiving frequent signals from the nervous system that strength still matters? When these signals are strong and regular, muscle building processes remain active. Protein synthesis stays balanced with breakdown. Repair mechanisms remain alert. But when signals weaken, the balance shifts. This does not happen dramatically. It unfolds quietly, over years, often unnoticed, because the body prefers gradual change to sudden disruption. Muscle fibers become slightly smaller. Motor units fire less often. Strength fades slowly enough that the mind adapts before it becomes aware. This adaptation begins in the nervous system. Muscles do not decide their fate alone. They respond to instruction. Every movement starts in the brain, travels through motor neurons, and ends in muscle contraction. With age and reduced physical challenge, the clarity of these neural messages diminishes. Fewer motor units are recruited. Movements become more efficient but less forceful. The muscle interprets this as reduced necessity. From a biological perspective, maintaining unused capacity is wasteful. So the muscle adapts by shrinking its fibers, lowering its metabolic cost, and becoming more economical. Hormonal changes reinforce this message. Growth-promoting hormones gradually decline with age, but not to zero. What changes more significantly is sensitivity. Muscle cells become less responsive to the same signals they once amplified. This phenomenon is not unique to muscle. It happens throughout the body as systems prioritize stability over growth. The reduction in responsiveness is protective in some contexts, but it also means that muscles now require stronger or more frequent stimuli to maintain their size. Without those stimuli, the body assumes that peak strength is no longer essential for survival. Inflammation plays a subtle but powerful role in this adaptation. As the body ages, low-grade inflammation becomes more common, often driven by stress, poor sleep, inactivity, or metabolic strain. This inflammatory background alters how muscle tissue interprets signals. Growth becomes riskier in an environment that feels unstable. The body shifts toward preservation rather than expansion. Muscle stem cells, responsible for repair and regeneration, become more cautious. They are still present, but less eager to act. Shrinking muscle becomes a safer option than rebuilding it. Importantly, none of this is abrupt or pathological at first. It is not disease. It is adjustment. The body is not breaking down. It is optimizing for a different set of expectations. Modern life rarely demands the physical challenges that once kept muscles essential. Technology reduces resistance. Chairs replace squatting. Transportation replaces walking. Convenience replaces effort. The body responds exactly as it was designed to respond, by reducing capacity that no longer appears necessary. This is why muscle loss feels inevitable when viewed only through the lens of age. Time passes, routines soften, demands decrease, and the body adapts accordingly. But adaptation is not a one-way process. Muscles do not disappear because they are old. They shrink because they are underinformed. When clear signals return, the system responds, even later in life. Research consistently shows that older muscle retains the ability to grow when given sufficient stimulus. This alone tells us that loss was never absolute decline, but conditional response. Understanding muscle loss as adaptation changes the emotional narrative of aging. It removes blame and fear. The body is not betraying us. It is listening. It is responding to the environment we place it in and the messages we send through daily behavior. When muscles shrink, they are not expressing failure. They are expressing relevance, responding precisely to what is asked of them and nothing more. Seen this way, aging becomes less about inevitable loss and more about shifting priorities within the body's internal economy. Muscle mass becomes a reflection of ongoing dialogue rather than a countdown clock. The question muscles continuously ask is not how old the body is, but how necessary strength still appears to be in the rhythm of daily life, in the challenges imposed, in the signals delivered through movement, tension, and intention, shaping tissue size not through decay, but through adaptation that remains quietly responsive to change. The relationship between the brain and muscle is one of the most intimate and continuous conversations in the human body. Yet, it is rarely acknowledged when we talk about strength or aging. Muscle does not act independently. Every contraction begins as an electrical intention in the brain, travels down the spinal cord, and reaches muscle fibers through motor neurons. Strength, in this sense, is not stored in muscle alone, but distributed across a network of neural communication. When this network changes with age, muscle responds accordingly, not as a passive victim, but as an attentive listener. In younger years, the brain speaks to muscle with clarity and confidence. Neural signals are frequent, coordinated, and forceful. Large groups of motor units are recruited together, allowing muscles to generate high levels of tension. This neural efficiency is a major reason why young muscle feels powerful and responsive. It is not simply that muscle fibers are larger, but that the brain knows how to use them fully. With age, however, this neural precision begins to soften. Motor neurons are lost gradually, and the remaining ones take on more responsibility. This reorganization is adaptive, but it reduces the fine control and strength of muscle activation. As neural input decreases, muscles receive fewer instructions to contract with intensity. This reduction is not always noticeable in daily life because most routine movements require only a fraction of available strength. Walking, standing, and light tasks can be performed even as neural drive declines. The body prioritizes efficiency, allowing essential functions to continue smoothly while quietly letting go of excess capacity. From the muscle's perspective, reduced neural stimulation signals that maximal strength is no longer essential. In response, muscle fibers adjust by shrinking and simplifying their structure. The weakening of the brain. Muscle connection is also influenced by changes in sensory feedback. Muscles rely on constant information from joints, tendons, and connective tissue to refine movement. With age, this feedback becomes less precise. Proprioception, the sense of where the body is in space, gradually dulls. When feedback is unclear, the brain becomes more conservative in its commands. It limits force output to maintain stability and prevent injury. Muscles, receiving these cautious signals, adapt by reducing size and contractile potential. Another layer of this relationship involves attention and intention. In youth, movement is often exploratory and varied. The brain challenges muscles with novel tasks, unpredictable loads, and spontaneous effort. As routines become more repetitive and controlled, neural stimulation narrows. Muscles are activated in the same patterns, at similar intensities, day after day. The brain no longer needs to engage its full motor repertoire. Over time, unused neural pathways weaken. Muscles innervated by these pathways lose stimulation and gradually shrink, not because they are damaged, but because they are underused at the neural level. Stress and cognitive load also reshape brain, muscle communication. Chronic mental stress alters neural signaling priorities. The brain becomes focused on threat management and energy conservation. Non-essential systems, including maximal muscle output, receive less attention. This shift is subtle but cumulative. When the nervous system remains in a low-level state of alert for years, muscle activation patterns change. Tension becomes protective rather than powerful. Strength is replaced by stiffness. Muscles adapt to this new tone by altering their structure, often becoming smaller but tighter. Sleep plays a critical role in maintaining neural health, and with age, sleep quality often declines. Poor sleep disrupts motor learning, neural repair, and signal transmission. The brain's ability to send clean, coordinated messages to muscle weakens. Over time, this contributes to reduced motor unit recruitment and slower reaction times. Muscles, deprived of strong neural input, down-regulate their size and strength as part of a broader energy-saving strategy. Importantly, the brain-muscle connection does not vanish with age. It becomes quieter, not broken. Neural plasticity remains, meaning the brain can relearn how to activate muscle more fully when challenged appropriately. Studies show that early strength gains in older adults often occur before significant muscle growth, driven by improved neural recruitment rather than structural change. This reveals a powerful truth. Much of what we perceive as muscle loss is actually neural withdrawal. The muscle was capable, but the brain had stopped calling on it. Understanding muscle loss through this lens shifts responsibility away from age itself and toward communication. Muscles shrink when the brain no longer asks them to express strength. This is not a flaw in design, but an expression of adaptability. The body constantly negotiates how much capacity it needs to maintain. When neural signals fade, muscles follow that lead, resizing themselves to match the volume of instruction they receive, reflecting not the passing of years, but the quiet dimming of a conversation that can be revived when intention, challenge, and neural engagement return to daily movement patterns. Chronic inflammation is often discussed as an enemy, something to be eliminated or suppressed. But within the body, it begins as a signal, not a mistake. In small, temporary doses, inflammation is essential for healing and adaptation. It clears damaged tissue, recruits repair cells, and initiates rebuilding. The problem arises when inflammation never fully resolves, when the body remains in a low-level defensive state for years. This quite persistent inflammation subtly reshapes priorities across biological systems, including how muscle tissue decides whether to grow, repair, or conserve itself. As the body ages, sources of low-grade inflammation accumulate. Reduced physical activity, metabolic stress, disrupted sleep, psychological strain, and environmental exposures all contribute. None of these alone may be dramatic, but together they create a background noise that the immune system interprets as ongoing threat. In this environment, the body becomes cautious. Growth is no longer the default response. Preservation takes precedence. Muscle tissue, highly sensitive to internal signals, adjusts its behavior accordingly. Muscle maintenance depends on a delicate balance between building new proteins and breaking down old ones. Chronic inflammation shifts this balance. Inflammatory signaling molecules increase protein breakdown while simultaneously interfering with synthesis. The muscle is not being destroyed in an acute sense, but it is being nudged toward reduction. Over time, this bias leads to smaller fibers and reduced strength. The body is not attacking muscle. It is reallocating resources toward what it perceives as more urgent survival needs. Muscle stem cells, often referred to as satellite cells, are especially affected by this inflammatory climate. These cells are responsible for repairing damaged fibers and contributing to growth. In a healthy, low-stress environment, they are responsive and efficient. Under chronic inflammation, however, their behavior changes. They become less active, more selective, and slower to respond. The body interprets constant inflammatory signals as a reason to avoid aggressive rebuilding. Muscle tissue, lacking robust repair input, gradually reduces its size. Hormonal signaling is also altered by chronic inflammation. Inflammatory molecules interfere with anabolic hormones and growth pathways. Even when hormones are present, muscles become resistant to their effects. This resistance is not random. It is a protective adaptation. In a body that perceives persistent stress, unrestrained growth could increase vulnerability. Muscle cells respond by dampening their sensitivity, choosing stability over expansion. The nervous system does not operate separately from this process. Chronic inflammation affects neural signaling and motor control. It alters how the brain activates muscles, often favoring co-contraction and stiffness over powerful, coordinated movement. This protective motor strategy reduces injury risk in a stressed system, but it also limits the intensity of muscle use. Reduced neural drive further reinforces the message that large, powerful muscles are unnecessary, encouraging gradual shrinkage. Inflammation also affects energy metabolism. Muscle tissue is a major site of glucose and fat utilization. In an inflammatory state, metabolic efficiency declines. The body becomes less capable of using muscle effectively as an energy buffer. As a result, maintaining large amounts of muscle becomes less advantageous. The body adapts by reducing muscle mass, lowering energy demands, and simplifying metabolic regulation. What makes this process especially insidious is its invisibility. Chronic inflammation does not usually cause pain or obvious symptoms in its early stages. Muscle loss occurs quietly, without the warning signs that accompany acute illness. Strength fades gradually, flexibility declines, and endurance diminishes. These changes are often attributed to aging itself, rather than to the internal environment shaping tissue behavior. Importantly, muscle tissue is not helpless in the face of inflammation. It responds dynamically to changes in its environment. Movement, especially when varied and appropriately challenging, has powerful anti-inflammatory effects. Physical activity alters immune signaling, improves metabolic health, and restores more favorable conditions for muscle maintenance. When inflammation decreases, muscle stem cells regain responsiveness, protein synthesis improves, and neural activation becomes more confident. Nutrition, sleep, and stress regulation also influence this internal climate. When the body receives consistent signals of safety and recovery, inflammation resolves more effectively. Muscle tissue interprets this resolution as permission to invest in growth and repair again. The shrinking seen with age is not simply the passage of time, but the result of prolonged exposure to signals that favor conservation over expansion. Viewing muscle loss through the lens of chronic inflammation reframes the narrative of aging. The body is not eroding from within. It is making careful decisions based on the information it receives. When that information suggests ongoing stress and instability, muscle tissue adapts by becoming smaller and less demanding. This adaptation remains flexible, responsive to improved conditions, reflecting the body's enduring capacity to recalibrate priorities when the internal environment shifts toward balance and recovery rather than defense. Muscles are shaped less by time than by expectation. They are living tissues that continuously assess what the body asks of them, measuring demand through tension, load, and resistance. When life stops asking muscles to struggle, to stabilize under pressure, or to generate force beyond comfort, they receive a clear biological message. Their full capacity is no longer required. In response, muscles do not protest or fail. They adapt. They reduce size, strength, and complexity to match the level of challenge placed upon them. Human movement once contained natural resistance. Daily survival demanded lifting, carrying, climbing, squatting, and sustained effort. Muscles were constantly reminded of their value through necessity. In modern life, much of this resistance has been engineered away. Chairs replace the floor, machines replace labor, convenience replaces effort. The body still moves, but movement rarely challenges the limits of muscle capacity. Muscles sense this immediately because they are designed to respond to intensity, not repetition alone. Without meaningful physical challenge, muscle fibers receive fewer signals to maintain their size. Mechanical tension is one of the strongest stimuli for muscle preservation. When muscles are loaded near their limits, they interpret this as a signal of importance. When tension remains low and predictable, muscles interpret safety rather than necessity. Over time, fibers reduce their cross-sectional area. Strength declines gradually, often without noticeable discomfort, because the demands of daily life still fall within the reduced capacity. This process is not laziness on the body's part. It is efficiency. Muscle tissue is costly to maintain. It consumes energy even at rest. When the body determines that such capacity is no longer essential, it reallocates resources elsewhere. This decision is guided by experience, not intention. Muscles do not care about goals or identity. They respond to physics. If gravity and load are no longer resisted with intensity, muscle tissue adjusts accordingly. The loss of challenge also affects coordination and confidence. When muscles are not challenged, the nervous system stops recruiting higher threshold motor units. These units are responsible for power and strength. They remain available but dormant. Over time, unused neural pathways weaken. Muscles connected to those pathways shrink. What remains is enough strength for comfort, but not enough for resilience. Fear plays an unspoken role in this cycle. As people age, movement often becomes cautious, not because injury has occurred, but because the idea of strain feels risky. Movements become smaller, slower, and more controlled. While caution can prevent injury, it also removes the very stimulus muscles need to stay robust. The body interprets avoidance of effort as confirmation that high strength is unnecessary. Muscles respond by downsizing, reinforcing the cycle of caution. Even structured exercise can fail to provide meaningful challenge if it avoids progression. Repeating the same movements at the same intensity teaches muscles that adaptation is complete. Without gradual increases in load or complexity, muscles stop receiving new information. They maintain what is needed for the task and let go of what is not. This is why muscles respond more to challenge than to duration. Long periods of low effort do not compensate for the absence of resistance. The emotional experience of effort also matters. When challenge is framed as punishment, the nervous system resists engagement. Muscles contract defensively rather than powerfully. True challenge invites cooperation between brain and body. It requires attention, intention, and willingness to approach discomfort. When this relationship is absent, muscles receive incomplete signals. They respond conservatively, prioritizing safety over strength. What makes this loss especially misleading is that muscles can shrink without pain. There is no alarm. The body adapts quietly. Strength fades slowly enough that it feels natural. even inevitable. But this quiet adaptation is reversible because it was never caused by damage, only by lack of demand. Muscles remain responsive far longer than commonly believed. They are waiting for clear instructions. Challenge does not mean extremes. It means asking muscles to do something they are not fully prepared for, then allowing them to adapt. This dialogue between stress and recovery is how muscle tissue stays alive and engaged. When that dialogue stops, muscles do not rebel. They simply scale down to meet expectations. In this way, muscle loss reflects the story of modern movement. It is not a failure of biology, but a reflection of a world that asks less of the body while demanding more comfort. Muscles respond honestly to what they experience, reshaping themselves to fit the level of challenge present in daily life, quietly reminding us that strength is not lost to age, but surrendered to the absence of meaningful resistance that once told the body it was still required. Muscles do not age in isolation. They respond to signals, demands, and expectations. And those signals remain interpretable far longer than most people realize. The idea that muscles simply become incapable of responding after a certain age is more cultural belief than biological truth. What actually changes is not the muscle's ability to adapt, but the likelihood that it will be asked to. The body is economical. It maintains what it uses and releases what it does not, regardless of the number of years lived. At the cellular level, muscle tissue remains remarkably adaptable well into later life. The machinery required for growth and repair does not vanish with age. Protein synthesis pathways still function. Muscle fibers still respond to tension. Neural connections can still strengthen. What diminishes is the frequency and clarity of the signals that activate these systems. Without those signals, muscles appear unresponsive, giving the illusion that age itself has shut the door on change. One of the strongest pieces of evidence for this responsiveness comes from how quickly strength can return when muscles are challenged again. In older adults, early gains in strength often occur before visible muscle growth. This tells us that the nervous system is reawakening dormant pathways, learning once again how to recruit muscle fibers efficiently. The muscle was never incapable. It was simply underutilized. The moment demand returns, adaptation begins. Muscles are designed to respond to necessity, not to time. They do not measure birthdays. They measure load, tension, and frequency of use. When those inputs increase, even later in life, muscles respond by reorganizing themselves. Fibers grow thicker. Coordination improves. Endurance increases. These changes may occur more slowly than in youth, but they occur nonetheless, demonstrating that biological responsiveness persists far beyond what is commonly assumed. The misconception of irreversible decline often comes from confusing adaptation with damage. True damage, such as severe disease or prolonged immobilization, can limit muscle recovery. But in the absence of such conditions, most age-related muscle loss reflects disuse rather than destruction. The tissue has adapted downward because demand decreased, not because capacity disappeared. This distinction is crucial because adaptation can be reversed by changing the environment and expectations placed on the body. Psychology plays a significant role in whether muscles are ever given the chance to respond again. Many people internalize the idea that strength is a young person's domain. This belief subtly shapes behavior. Movements become cautious. Effort is avoided. Challenges are declined before they are attempted. Muscles interpret this avoidance as confirmation that high capacity is unnecessary. They remain quiet, not because they cannot respond, but because they are never invited to. The body does not require perfection to adapt. It requires consistency and clarity. Muscles respond to repeated messages that strength matters. These messages come through resistance, through movement that demands control, through effort that approaches but does not overwhelm limits. When such signals are present, muscle tissue adjusts its structure accordingly. Age may slow the process, but it does not erase it. Even recovery mechanisms remain active later in life. Muscle repair, when supported by adequate rest, nutrition, and circulation, continues to function. The body still knows how to heal. It still knows how to rebuild. What it needs is reason. Muscles are pragmatic. They grow when growth serves a purpose. When life provides that purpose, muscles respond. Viewing muscles as responsive rather than declining changes the emotional landscape of aging. It replaces resignation with curiosity. Instead of asking what has been lost, the question becomes, what signals are currently being sent? This perspective restores agency. It acknowledges that while time changes the body, it does not silence it. Muscles remain attentive, listening for instruction, waiting for evidence that strength is still relevant. The persistence of muscle responsiveness is not a promise of youth regained, but a reminder of biological dialogue. The body remains in conversation with its environment throughout life. Muscles adjust their size and strength to match what that conversation communicates. When strength is no longer requested, muscles withdraw. When it is requested again, they respond, proving that age does not end adaptability, but simply reflects the messages that have been repeated over time, shaping tissue not by years alone, but by the demands and intentions that continue to reach the body and invite it to remain capable.